Okay, we're here with J.D. Lambright, and he's running for re-election to the Montgomery County Attorney's Office, first term incumbent. And I'm John Wertz, and with me is Bob Bagley. We got a short crew tonight because of Christmas holidays, but we're going to go ahead and, as we discussed with J.D., let him open up with up to 5-minute opening, and then we'll start the Q&As after that.
Okay, sounds great. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, and thank the Montgomery County Tea Party in general for doing what you do, because I know it's no small task, and particularly this go around with this many races, this many candidates. But as you said, my name is J.D. Lambright. I am in the third year of my first term as county attorney. And I know you gentlemen know me somewhat, but perhaps for those that may watch that don't know me, I'm a lifelong Texan, as well as my wife. In fact, at the end of this year, we'll celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary here in just a few days.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. My background is somewhat different, and I think that's one of the big pluses that I brought into the campaign when I was elected. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in electrical engineering from Texas Tech University. I got my bachelor's in 1972, my master's in 74. And then I immediately went to work for a Shell Oil company in Houston as a geophysicist and electrical engineer. And I had a great career there, working projects all over the continental U.S. and around the world for 25 years. But during my Shell career, I decided to go to law school. I started law school nights and weekends and completed that. And then I had 25 years with Shell and decided, you know, I've had a wonderful career, but I just had a yearning to do something different. And so I retired early from Shell in '99. I had 25 years. And essentially the next day I opened my private law practice in downtown Conroe. And that's what I did for the next 13 years, handling civil, family, and criminal matters, kind of all kinds of cases. And then, you know, undertook to run for office, and here we are now. And it was said during the campaign that was that you know, I've never worked in the government sector, and so you know, I'm not going to be qualified to be county attorney. I think my lack of working in the government sector was one of the strongest points I brought into it. Good evening. Because it's just a different mindset. I think a different sense of urgency, things you pay attention to. And I use that same philosophy with a lot of the people I brought in with me, with the exception of, I believe, 2 people that I brought in. All of them came from the private sector. And I said during my campaign, I want to get the best and the brightest people. And I was told I couldn't do that either because they won't come to work for the county for what the county can pay them. I think we proved them wrong on day one in my office with the kind of people that we have brought in and have continued to follow that. I wanted to improve the responsiveness to our clients. I heard so often during the campaign that the slow response time of the county attorney's office, trying to get a legal opinion, and some things are very short fused. They need to know, like now, there's an urgency they need to know an answer to. Other things are much longer term. Maybe we've got a day or a week or 2 weeks or whatever to research it. And so what I have done is we brought in subject matter experts in every area that my office handles. Essentially what we are, we're the chief legal advisors for all of our county government. And as the 5 central law firms under one roof, we prosecute all the juvenile cases for the county. We average 1,200 or 1,300 juvenile cases each year. And those are Class B misdemeanors up through capital murder. Since I've been in office, we've handled 2 juvenile capital murder cases. By the way, a juvenile in this county or this state is a youth between the ages of 10 and 16. We also are the attorneys for Child Protective Services. So I have a staff of lawyers and legal assistants in the Child Protective Services Division. We also handle all the legalities of the real estate transactions with the county. And so I have a team there. That's one area where I brought in a double board certified attorney, 30 years of experience that knows about everything there is about the real estate field. We also handle all the litigation for the county. So I've got a litigation team. And finally, we have the government affairs section, which is kind of everything else. Legal opinions of every sort, labor and employment issues, contracts, you name it. So that's what we brought into the office. And I was so pleased my first year we were selected among a lengthy list of nominees as the Department of the Year in Montgomery County. Never before been done in the history of the county attorney's office. And then the next year, one of my employees was named Employee of the Year out of about 2,300 county employees. And in 2014 and 2015, I was named Boss of the Year in Montgomery County. And that really is not so much about me, but about the staff and the job we're doing for our clients. So I think that's kind of in a nutshell who we are and what we do. We're a total staff of about 30. I've not changed that any since I came in, where we haven't added anything to the staff at all.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We're right at 5 minutes. I'll kick it off. Boy, with all these accolades, the office, Department of the Year, Boss of the Year, Employee of the Year, seems like, wow, man, I'd be enticed to stay forever. How long do you want to stay in this position?
Well, one thing I said from the outset when I was running, I've been blessed with great health, a lot of energy. I don't need a lot of sleep or anything, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and from what all of our clients tell us, that we're doing an outstanding job. And I want to keep that same level of energy, enthusiasm, and if that ever starts to wane, then it's time for me to do something else. Obviously, at my age, I'm not going to be somebody serving 20 years as county attorney, I don't think, coming in at my stage of life. And that we may touch on term limits in here, that we can talk about that as well if you like. But I definitely want to seek another term, which is what I'm doing now. And I think it's important we continue to build on the successes we have and just continue to serve our clients in an effective and in a fiscally responsible manner.
Okay. Got a little time left, about a minute. What do you think about term limits?
Yeah, on term limits, and I mentioned that in the questionnaire here. In my direct answer is about term limits is yes, I'm in favor of term limits. It's a two-edged sword, though. I wish that the people that have the most power over term limits are the voters. And if the voters would do, what they should do, that would take care of itself.
But they don't.
But that's the reality of what we see. You get some incumbents in there, and maybe it's someone doing a very subpar job, but they're able to seemingly keep that year after year after year. On the flip side of that, somebody that's doing an outstanding job, term limits is going to remove them from office. But that's the reason, all in all, I would have to say I'm in support of term limits, despite those negative consequences that may come from it at times. I think all in all, the public would be better served, at least the way voting seems to go, maybe the apathy of the voters of getting out and educating themselves and informing themselves.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Dale. Dale Fessenden is now to join us.
Kim Davis. District attorney, or not a district attorney, but pardon me, district clerk. And I didn't hear anything about her. In our case, you are the advocate for our district clerk in this county.
That's right. We're the legal advisors for our district clerk, as well as all of our elected officials, department heads, and employees.
And you mentioned litigation staff.
That's correct.
I didn't hear any mention of any litigation staff, any representation, anybody standing up for Kim Davis. If that happened here, what could you do? What would you do?
In your terms there, I forget what state.
Kentucky.
Yeah, I'm well aware of the situation. And what we did do and would do is advise our clients on the best way to handle those kind of situations. Because we are charged with staunchly and aggressively defending our clients. And in this case, our district clerk, our county clerk, we got involved in that in some extent with one of our justices of the peace when it came about prayer in the courtroom as an example of different but certainly a related issue there where there's some strong religious viewpoints and so forth. And we certainly respect that. So what we did is just advise our clients, here's the best way that we would recommend you handle that. Because we've also got to look out for the county's interest. I mean, ultimately our duty is back to the county as well as the district clerk or county clerk or whatever official it may be. But we staunchly, we defend lawsuits and cases every day of the week, more often than not federal, but a number of those in state court as well.
What can the county attorney do if the sheriff comes to arrest one of your clients?
Well, in that case, that is an exception there. We do not represent our clients in criminal matters. So obviously, if the sheriff is coming to arrest somebody, then that person would need to get their own outside criminal attorney.
Was that classified as a criminal matter?
Well, if the sheriff comes to arrest somebody, that would be obviously a criminal matter.
Okay, but in that case, do you agree that that would have been, was misclassified as a criminal matter?
Yes, I would not have characterized that as a criminal matter in the case you cite, the Kim Davis case.
Okay. Bob?
We're talking about, now I've got to get back on here again. Hate this. I didn't have it written, so I've got it all on. Property rights and number 9, do you think the county needs to zone areas to control population densities and development patterns? We just went through a mess trying to get a road bond killed because of lack of development for roads. We continue to have issues within the county for lack of development for developments, where we have a developer decides to go in and there's one entrance to that development. There's no other exit.
Mm-hmm.
And so if something happens in that entrance, we have no way of getting emergency medical or any first responders in that way, nor can we evacuate people out of there. To me, that comes down to a planning thing, and it falls back onto the county. And I'm not looking for zoning, but I believe we need to do something in that way so that we're not putting chemical plants right next to a housing development or a sewage treatment plant right next to a housing development. But you're not in favor, according to this, of us getting involved, or are you involved, or do you agree that we should? Now, granted, it's not your position to do that as far as the county attorney, but on the other hand, when there's issues and the county gets sued for things that are taking place for that, then it comes back to your office.
Exactly.
So I'd like your feelings on this.
Sure. And one thing I didn't say at the beginning, my office, we have no role in policy making. That's the purview of the Commissioners Court. And our job is to legally advise and to implement and execute in a legal fashion and advise them the legalities of how you need to do something. One thing in Texas about land use restrictions, and here I think I can distinguish a county from a municipality, like the city of Conroe, city of Willis, Shenandoah, or whatever. The authority of the county, in fact, the county has no authority to do any kind of zoning, and they're very, very limited what a county can do as far as any kind of land use restrictions. So essentially, a county under Texas law, a county can only do what the legislature has given it the authority to do. So counties are very limited in that regard. Conversely, a municipality, like one of the cities I mentioned, it's essentially the flip side of that. A municipality can essentially enact anything they want that's not precluded by legislative statute. So they have a much more leeway there. An example that came up very early in my term didn't deal with land use regulations, but we were getting calls from some of the officials in the Woodlands. And there was a concern that registered sex offenders and other felons were starting taxi service in the Woodlands, put a magnetic sign on the car, and they're in the taxi business. And they wanted the county to enact some sort of ordinance to be able to regulate taxis, like the city of Conroe does. Unfortunately, there is nothing that gives us any power whatsoever to do that, or many other things, which is like land use regulations. Certainly planning and looking at these things from a broad perspective amongst the entire Commissioners Court, certainly a worthwhile thing to do. But I have to say they are quite limited in being able to pose any such regulations. So the remedy is back with the legislature. And we've had some success doing that. in this past year, we've got it through the legislature where the county, Montgomery County can now have their own towing ordinances. And we delivered a draft on that today. In what it was, the county didn't have the authority until your population got up officially to 500,000. Legislature lowered that to, I believe, 450,000, so we now qualify. So the legislature is the one that can step in and give some relief there, so the county does have those authorities.
On the question 24, opinion of Joe Corley
Yes, sir.
and the Montgomery County mental health facility issues, you address that. I don't know that, just looking through this again, I don't think that you addressed the court's actions, and I think you were out of the office that day, where they issued checks back to Linda Brazil and I don't even remember the guy's name with, is it Alliance Construction?
Well, not with Alliance Development, but with the former Commissioner at Chance.
And Chance, okay.
Yes.
That they issued checks back to them, and I guess that was attorney's fees. Or were those attorney fees? And if so, it appeared to be that what they issued was more than I think what a typical attorney might charge under the circumstance. Do you have any comments, further comments on that other than what you put in questions 24?
Yes, I can. And one reason I was talking about it being kind of broad, because I kind of need to know, okay, where do you want to go? Because we are quite familiar with that. Obviously, those two facilities were constructed, long before me taking office. And unfortunately, that was the only commissioner's court I think I missed all year. In fact, that was the first vacation, 4 days I think that I'd taken all year, and then when that came down. But yes, I was not in favor of those payments being made, because we know exactly the transactions that have been occurring between my office and the attorneys representing the people you mentioned. And I can assure you there was very little effort expended on the attorneys on those other sides. Some phone calls, a couple of letters, in a meeting, I guess. The vast majority of the time of those attorneys was clearly spent during the criminal portion of the investigation, both on the federal side and on our local district attorney's side. And I do not think that reimbursing them for their criminal attorney expenditures, that would not be something that I would recommend or support doing at all.
Is that pretty much a moot issue as far as the court's concerned? Because it seemed to me that they try to put it to bed by paying them back. Is that something that could be resurrected again with either public pressure or a new court?
Well, as you know, we do have somewhat of a new court now since that happened. In order to move forward, in any case, whether it's in this situation or in private practice, you always got to have a willing client. And I don't think we had that here, and I don't think we currently have that. As you are aware, and it's very public out there, my office had researched this issue, and we sent demand letters to 3 different people associated with the construction of those 2 facilities. I stand by today, every single word we put in those demand letters was true and correct in there. And in fact, the largest one we were talking about was the developer of the facilities. And he had 2 lawyers, he had a criminal lawyer and a civil lawyer, and they agreed almost down to the penny with our figures, that what we said you got paid and what they agreed that they got paid. Which we thought was, in our opinion, in the attorney's office, was substantial overpayment there. Unfortunately, those letters, nothing whatsoever to do with my office, those letters were made public, and that certainly puts a damper on, because that's where you start any civil lawsuit, really. You put the other side on notice, hey, here's a demand, we think you owe us this, or you need to do this, and that's exactly what we did. But we found ourselves very quickly out in the public domain with that, despite our wishes that hadn't have happened. And, we would have, in any case, you evaluate the risk and potential risk of going forward. And there were different levels of risk associated with each of those potential defendants. But I don't see at this point that there's any will of the court for us to move forward. The time clock is really running now.
The time clock is still running.
I would have to look, I guess, just to refresh my memory on the timing there. I don't know if we have now passed the time when you can bring that. I just don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah.
It certainly had not
From a
passed at the
civil
time we were
perspective,
pursuing it.
but not criminal. Criminal, if there's fraud, I think goes for a number of years, 7 years or more. Okay.
And that was one of the issues on the criminal side by the time it actually got to our DA's office, because the feds did not indict any of those. And then the misdemeanor cases, which were, I think, some very strong misdemeanor cases, the statute of limitations had run on those, a very short statute of limitations, it's a 2-year statute. And by that time, it had run.
Can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
Because we all follow this very close. When the grand jury came down with their ruling on the commissioners, and counted almost every one of them, all but one of them, with lack of ethics and abusing their position for personal gain. And it was brought up that they all needed to go through ethics training. And they needed to stop making money on the back of the taxpayers. As I recall, those the exact words that were in there.
In fact, I was in court that day when the
When it was read.
foreman of the grand jury and another grand jury member presented that.
To my knowledge, none of that's changed. There's been no training. They've not gone to any ethics training. Somebody to come in and speak, and not just to the commissioners, but every elected official in this county needs to have ethics training. And this to me comes back to your office, because you're the one that has to defend them, and to defend me as a taxpayer as well, to make sure that our government's being run properly. It's not being done. So what can be done? What can you do to make sure that it takes place? Or what do we have to do as citizens to call them out for their misconduct?
And I wholeheartedly agree with your comment about ethics and following proper ethical procedures. What happened back at that time, shortly after the session you talked about in Commissioner's Court, Judge Sadler at the time then commissioned another local attorney, Larry Forrester, who represents a number of municipalities and other people around the county, to draw up ethical guidelines for Montgomery County. And I remember him stating in court, Judge Sadler stating in court, then he wanted somebody on the outside, if you will, like that, try to remove the politics from it. But he did urge Larry to consult with me and my office, and also the district attorney's office in doing that. And so over some period of time, I know Mr. Forster did that. I saw the document he produced. Now, he went much further than what the commissioners, as I recall, were charging him with developing ethical guidelines for Commissioner's Court. And what Larry developed was essentially ethical guidelines for all county employees, which nothing bad about that at all. But a concern we had expressed, it's totally unenforceable, if you will, against the elected officials. They can choose to follow it or not, and they do it at their own peril for the voting public, of course. But they could be really used as a sword, if you will, against county employees by, higher ups, department heads or elected officials. But nothing to really, have any muscle to it going the other direction. And to my knowledge, there has been no training. I don't think there's been any follow-up on that. We 100% would support doing that. As you say, it can potentially make our lives and our jobs easier in the county attorney's office. But I haven't heard anything where there's an appetite to go forward, despite Larry Forster being commissioned to go do that. If there has been some training, I'm not aware of it. I really don't think there has been.
And the policy was never accepted?
There is, no policy has ever been adopted. Again, we don't have any role in policy making. If we had been commissioned with it, we would have done that. We would have developed some guidelines and policy and be presenting that to the court. Unfortunately, it seems like this one perhaps has kind of died on the vine, and I'm sure the public could put some pressure to bring that back up.
So at what point does it become your responsibility as the county attorney to follow up with what the wishes of the grand jury was and the comments that were made, and protecting us as citizens to make sure this takes place?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we really have no authority in my office. It's a policy decision. If anybody on the court would tell us, this is what we want y'all to do, we would be all over it and would get that done. I'd probably just build on what Larry Forster's done, because that document was prepared, and I've discussed it with Larry. That's been quite some time ago now. Gosh, well over a year since that happened. But I do support the concept, whether it's my people or any of the other ones. Ethics are extraordinarily important. I think it's one thing that's wrong with all of our government, whether it's local, state, or national right now, is there's so little confidence that people are behaving ethically and just doing the right thing. It ought to be an easy thing to do, but some seem to struggle with that.
Okay, so let me continue on with that one. I'm taking personal.
I think you've already
Okay,
expired.
yeah.
Okay.
I think you've taken up your next turn too.
Yeah.
Okay, as you mentioned earlier, you are limited in degree to what the state legislature has put into the state constitution and whatever other bodies of law exist. Can you name one or two things where you would love to see the legislature change something, to either enact something, to remove something, to make your job easier, to make you and your office more effective in what you do?
Oh gosh, yeah, with a little more time, I probably could think of several things. One in particular, for example, being able to enact some kind of ordinances would be very nice. Just the rather simple but very important one that I mentioned earlier about restricting who can operate taxi cabs in the county. Municipalities can do that. We have no authority to do that. We have really no authority to do anything for, as the topic we discussed earlier, land use regulations. The counties, it's kind of a two-edged sword, because I'm a strong advocate, and I suspect you guys are too, a very limited government. And it's, in terms of the authority of a county, it's quite limited. So this is one of those cases where I think you would like to have some of the tools at your disposal. And we work closely with the legislature. We've got a great relationship with all of our legislators, our representatives and our state senators. And I think they would be very supportive of us, whatever we may want to do in that regard.
Have you done any coordination with them, submitted any suggestions, ideas, preferences for them?
The only two things we have worked on, we work closely with Senator Creighton and Representative Will Metcalf about the towing ordinance, because that's really a big public safety issue. I'm sure you've all seen on the highways. Maybe it's a minor offender banner, and then you have 10 or 12 records there. And it's seemingly a simple issue, but it gets rather complicated because the multitude of record drivers you have in this county, the record companies, from very large companies to essentially a single operator company. So that was one, probably the most recently we worked on. I'm gonna have to, off the top of my head, I can't think of. There's another thing we worked on with the legislature, but there's those two that come to my mind. I just can't remember the second one at the moment.
Okay.
But they're very receptive. I've got a great working relationship. I know all of them. They know me. They know some of the attorneys in the office. So primarily be my chiefs that would deal with them.
Okay, thank you. See, I guess we're back around to John.
Back to me. Okay, so question 15 on the road bond. I know as in your position, at the time you were precluded from taking a position on that road bond. other than support the legality of calling the election, can you express your personal opinion now that that's pretty well settled back in May and November 3rd election?
Yes, in fact, I don't think I ever heard during that entire period of someone advocating we don't need or want any road bond. Commissioner's Court after Commissioner's Court, maybe you're the sole.
There were a couple of us, but not many.
Yeah.
We, just to be clear, I stated over and over again, and I give credit to Jim Doyle, instead of a bond, let's get a plan. You know, a new plan, not necessarily a bond. You know, the whole question was, do we have, what do we have in the bank right now that we could use to do roads with, you know, from that perspective, and knowing what we get, you know, incoming in maintenance and operations. So that was kind of the first thing, you know, that I was advocating, you know, in the courts, you know, which is basically public. So I guess to answer your question, there were a few of us, you know, we weren't asking for just bonds. I actually wrote an article in the Courier about that, and I'm gonna cut your time off here, so we
I think I remember the article, yeah.
that we were drunk on bonds. So with that framing, you know, that there were advocates out there saying, hold on, wait a minute, you know, why do we have to do a bond for everything? Maybe you can answer in that context, and I think you were going down that direction, so.
Yeah, and I think it appears, maybe it's too early to say, but I think some inroads have been made there in looking at planning and setting aside money year after year after year to provide for that. Because I think that's something that's been lacking for apparently quite some time in this county, is a long-term vision, a long-term planning. And with the incredible growth that we're experiencing and traffic gains, I mean, we've all seen it. Traffic can just be a nightmare in places. I'm out there myself and I see it. But you know, if we're going to do this on a county-wide basis, and that's one thing I would like to see. Just me personally would like to see different, is more of a county-wide plan as opposed to just precinct by precinct. Because people drive between precincts all the time. And I come from a background with Shell of such, you know, long-term planning, short-term planning, and you have these visions and looking into the future, whether that's 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the road. And I think that's been sorely lacking in our county.
And you have kind of a portfolio of assets from different areas that, you know, management has to take into consideration all those and how they impact the bottom line, right? At oil companies, at least from what I've been exposed to in software that I've sold, portfolio optimization. So you have to take into consideration all of it and put it in. There's actually a software or a philosophy program around that called decision analysis, which I suggested that the court look into.
I recall you mentioned that on more than one occasion.
Yeah, and I don't think